He said his name was Peringuey, and he'd been knocked out by the crowd round the Stadt, Independence Hall. One thing led to another, and we took him up to Toby's rooms, same as Red Jacket had taken me the year before. The compliments he paid to Toby's Madeira wine fairly conquered the old man, for he opened a second bottle, and he told this Monsieur Peringuey all about our great stove dispute in the church. I remember Pastor Metter and Brother Adam Goose dropped in, and although they and Toby were direct opposites regarding stoves, yet this Monsieur Peringuey, he made 'em feel as if he thought each one was in the right of it. He said he had been a clergyman before he had to leave France. He admired Toby's fiddling, and he asked if Red Jacket, sitting by the spinet, was a simple Huron. Senecas aren't Hurons, they're Iroquois, of course, and Toby told him so. Well, then, in due time he arose and left in a style which made us feel he'd been favouring us, instead of us feeding him. I've never seen that so strong before, in a man. We all talked him over, but couldn't make head or tail of him, and Red Jacket come out to walk with me to the French Quarter where I was due to fiddle at a party. Passing Drinker's Alley again, we saw a naked window with a light in it, and there sat our button-selling Monsieur Peringuey throwing dice all alone, right hand against left. Says Red Jacket, keeping back in the dark, "Look at his face." I was looking. I protest to you I wasn't frightened like I was when Big Hand talked to his gentleman. I only looked, and I wondered that even those dead dumb dice 'd dare to fall different from what that face wished. It was a face. "He is bad," says Red Jacket, "but he is a great chief. The French have sent away a great chief. I thought so when he told us his lies. Now I know. I had to go on to the party, so I asked him to call round for me afterwards, and we'd have a hymn singing at Toby's as usual. No, he says, tell Toby I'm not Christian tonight, all Indian. He had those fits sometimes. I wanted to know more about Monsieur Peringuey, and the emigre party was the very place to find out. It's neither here nor there, of course, but those French emigre parties, they almost make you cry. The men that you bought fruit of in Market Street, the hairdressers and fencing masters and French teachers, they turn back again by candlelight to what they used to be at home, and you catch their real names. There wasn't much room in the wash-house, so I sat on top of the copper and played 'em the tunes they called for. Si le roi m'avait donné, and such nursery stuff. They cried sometimes. It hurt me to take their money afterwards, indeed it did. And there I found out about Monsieur Peringuey. He was a proper rogue, too. None of 'em had a good word for him except the Marquise that kept the French boarding-house on 4th Street. I made out that his real name was the Count Talleyrand de Perigord, a priest right enough, but sorely come down in the world. He'd been King Louis's ambassador to England a year or two back, before the French had cut off King Louis's head, and by what I heard, that head wasn't hardly more than hanging loose before he'd run back to Paris and prevailed on Danton, the very man which did the murder, to send him back to England again as ambassador of the French Republic. That was too much for the English, so they kicked him out by Act of Parliament, and he'd fled to the Americas without money or friends or prospects. I'm telling you the talk in the wash-house. Some of 'em was laughing over it. Says the French Marquise, "My friends, you laugh too soon. That man'll be on the winning side before any of us." "I did not know you were so fond of priests, Marquise," says the Vicomte. "His lady did my washing, as I've told you." "I have my reasons," says the Marquise. "He sent my uncle and my 2 brothers to heaven by the little door." That was one of the émigré names for the guillotine. "He will be on the winning side if it costs him the blood of every friend he has in the world." "Then what does he want here?" says one of 'em. "We have all lost our game." "My faith!" says the Marquise. "He will find out, if any one can, whether this canaille of a Washington means to help us fight England. Gennet, that was my ambassador in the embuscade, has failed and gone off disgraced. Fauchet, he was the new man, hasn't done any better, but our Abbe will find out, and he will make his profit out of the news. Such a man does not fall." "He begins unluckily," says the Vicomte. "He was set upon today in the street for not hooting your Washington." They all laughed again, and one remarks, "How does the poor devil keep himself?" "He must have slipped in through the wash-house door, for he flits past me and joins 'em cold as ice." "One does what one can," he says. "I sell buttons. And you, Marquise?" "I?" She waves her poor white hands all burned. I am a cook, a very bad one, at your service, Abbe. We were just talking about you. They didn't treat him like they talked of him. They backed off and stood still. I have missed something then, he says, but I spent this last hour playing, only for buttons, Marquise, against a noble savage, the veritable Huron himself. You had your usual luck, I hope, she says. Certainly, he says. I can't afford to lose even buttons in these days. Then I suppose the child of nature does not know that your dice are usually loaded, Father Tout-à-tous, she continues. I don't know whether she meant to accuse him of cheating. He only bows. Not yet, Mademoiselle Cunegonde, he says, and goes on to make himself agreeable to the rest of the company. And that was how I found out that our Monsieur Périgueux was Count Charles Maurice Talleyrand de Périgord. Pharaoh stopped, but the children said nothing. You've heard of him? Said Pharaoh. Una shook her head. Was Red Jacket the Indian he played dice with? He was. Red Jacket told me the next time we met. I asked if the lame man had cheated. Red Jacket said no, he had played quite fair and was a master player. I allowed Red Jacket knew. I've seen him on the reservation play himself out of everything he had and in again. Then I told Red Jacket all I'd heard at the party concerning Talleyrand. I was right, he says. I saw the man's war face when he thought he was alone. That's why I played him. I played him face to face. He's a great chief. Do they say why he comes here? They say he comes to find out if Big Hand makes war against the English, I said. Red Jacket grunted. Yes, he says. He asked me that too. If it had been a small chief I should have lied, but he is a great chief. He knew I was a chief, so I told him the truth. I told him what Big Hand said to Complanter and me in the clearing. There will be no war. I could not see what he thought. I could not see behind his face. But he is a great chief. He will believe. Will he believe that Big Hand can keep his people back from war? I said, thinking of the crowds that hooted Big Hand whenever he rode out. He is as bad as Big Hand is good, but he is not as strong as Big Hand, says Red Jacket. When he talks with Big Hand he will feel this in his heart. The French have sent away a great chief. Presently he will go back and make them afraid. Now wasn't that comical? The Frenchwoman that knew him and owed all her losses to him, the Indian that picked him up, cut and muddy on the street, and played dice with him, they neither of them doubted that Talleyrand was something by himself, appearances notwithstanding. And was he something by himself? asked Una. Pharaoh began to laugh, but stopped. The way I look at it, he said, Talleyrand was just one of 3 men in this world who are quite by themselves. Big Hand I put first, because I've seen him. Aye, said Puck. I'm sorry we lost him out of old England. Who do you put second? Talleyrand. Maybe because I've seen him too, said Pharaoh. Who's third? said Puck. Boney, even though I've seen him. Whew, said Puck. Every man has his own weights and measures, but that's queer reckoning. Boney, said Una. You don't mean you've ever met Napoleon Bonaparte? There, I knew you wouldn't have patience with the rest of my tale after hearing that. But wait a minute. Talleyrand, he came round to 118 in a day or two to thank Toby for his kindness. I didn't mention the dice playing, but I could see that Red Jacket's doings had made Talleyrand highly curious about Indians, though he would call him the Huron. Toby, as you may believe, was all holds full of knowledge concerning their manners and habits. He only needed a listener. The brethren don't study Indians much till they join the church, but Toby knew 'em wild. So evening after evening Talleyrand crossed his sound leg over his game one, and Toby poured forth. Having been adopted into the Senecas, I, naturally, kept still, but Toby'd call on me to back up some of his remarks, and by that means, and a habit he had of drawing you on into talk, Talleyrand saw I knew something of his noble savages too. Then he tried a trick. Coming back from an émigré party, he turns into his little shop and puts it to me laughing like, that I'd gone with the 2 chiefs on their visit to Big Hand. I hadn't told. Red Jacket hadn't told, and Toby, of course, didn't know. 'Twas just Talleyrand's guess. Now, he says, my English and Red Jacket's French was so bad that I am not sure I got the rights of what the President really said to the unsophisticated Huron. Do me the favour of telling it again. I told him every word Red Jacket had told him, and not one word more. I had my suspicions, having just come from an émigré party where the Marquise was hating and praising him as usual. Much obliged, he said. But I couldn't gather from Red Jacket exactly what the president